The Wheel and the Butterfly, written by Justice3442 and read by Chapter 45, Dan vs. Pinky's Birthday Party. Author's note. More music, sort of a montage thing. If you're against going to this Goggle Dogs link for some reason, I suppose you can just sing the Proclaimers' I'm Gonna Be 500 Miles to Yourself at the beginning of this. End author's note. A digital alarm clock cuts through the silence of a peaceful night. From under dimly lit covers of a bed, an angry hand shoots to snatch the offending device. Just as quickly, a slim, lightly gauze-wrapped feminine nail-polished hand shoots out the envelope the first hand, gently pulling it off the alarm and maneuvering it as it holds the hand below it to hit a button on the device with an index finger. Dan and Pinky groggily rise from the bed, stretching and yawning. Dan in nothing but his boxers, Pinky in a set of pink pajamas adorned with her cutie mark on the chest. Pinky grabs Dan's hand and drags a near catatonic man out of the bedroom, grabs a neatly piled set of black and blue clothing for him off the dresser as she does, and pushes the clothes in Dan's chest and the man into the bathroom. Pinky sets a glass full of dark red viscous liquid in front of Dan, who picks up the glass and downs the contents. His barely open eyes and sleepy expression are suddenly replaced with giant saucer-sized pupils and a large, mad grin. Pinky and Dan walk down a street, street light illuminating their walk as a white-shirted, black-vested, cut-off jean-clad Pinky laughs at Dan, who is emphatically and excitedly motioning out with his hands as his mouth moves non-stop. Dan feverishly dumps cups of flour, spoonfuls of various substances, and a large bowl full of a white, lumpy substance into a huge mixing bowl, and begins feverishly attacking the contents with a handheld electric mixer. Dan and Pinky slowly ascend the stairs to their apartment, frosting a various colorful streaked across their faces, arms draped over each other as they make their laborious journey up each step. The door to the apartment opens, and Dan and Pinky simply fall forward onto the ground as Mr. Mumbles bounds up and begins licking frosting off Dan's face. Pinky looks down at a tray of steaming hot muffins in the oven, looks at her bandaged hands, and leans her face down towards the tray, opens her mouth, and has her face swatted by a large red rolled-up potholder, courtesy of a displeased-looking Dan. He hands her the potholder, and Pinky takes it in her mouth and proceeds to use it to take the hot tray out of the oven. Dan drives by the antique mall and catches his reflection in the mirror still on display. He points at his eyes with his index and middle finger and points back to his own reflection in an "I'm keeping my eyes on you" fashion. Dan opens the door to the apartment holding two large BurgerFile bags in his hands. Pinky immediately wraps her arms around Dan, kisses him on the cheek, and gleefully grabs one of the bags out of his hand. The two roommates sit down on their blue couch together as they happily munch away on hamburgers and fries, illuminated by the warm glow of the TV in front of them. Pinky smiles contentedly as she leans her head down on Dan's shoulder. A red floral design-shirted, jean-clad Pinky and a black jerk-shirted, jean-clad Dan trudge out of the apartment, over the apartment walkway, downstairs, and down a familiar street, bleary-eyed and exhausted. A red floral design-shirted, jean-clad Pinky... We don't need to hear the close ever... Snoozes peacefully, hands latched around Dan's neck as he tramps around the other direction across the street. Dan deposits his sleeping Pinkie Pie on the bed and collapses on it himself, immediately passing out next to the pink-haired woman. A frazzled-looking Dan and Pinky collide with each other in the bakery kitchen. The two crash to the floor, dropping a large wooden spoon and baking spatula. Pinky landing on top of Dan. Dan grumbles irritably until he looks up into the smiling face of the woman above him. Pinky brushes her hair from her face, leans her head down, and cringes as Crunchy walks in holding a sheet of paper. Dan lobs a wooden spoon at Crunchy, hitting him in the face. This is quickly followed by the baking spatula that also hit its target. Pinky sits on Dan's lap in the tiny break room, arms encircling his neck. The two look deep into each other's eyes, lean forward, and slump their shoulders as GH throws open the door to the room and frantically points outside. Outside, Dan and Pinky survey the dining room as it is besieged by a small group of irate winged monkeys that are terrorizing customers and throwing baked goods about. Chris flails about as a winged monkey claws at him from a perch on his shoulder. Dan smacks a palm against his forehead as Pinky quickly trudges off and returns with a broom, an unamused expression plastered on her face. Dan, wearing his red Kiss the Jerk apron, opens his oven with a light blue oven mitt-covered hand and pulls out a meatloaf with the same hand. He glances over to a pink-framed picture sitting on top of his CD player and sighs happily at the picture of him smiling with his hands around the shoulders of an exuberant Pinky. Dan contentedly and absent-mindedly runs his hands through the thick, pink, curly hair of the sleeping girl who has rested her head against his bare chest under the covers of the bed they share. He frowns as he attempts to lift his hand up and find that it can't get out of the tangled mass. A sleepy-looking Pinkie Pie wheels a sleeping Dan, who is strapped to a dolly, down the street as Dan snores away. An exhausted-looking Dan wheels a sleeping Pinkie Pie, who is strapped to a dolly, up the street as Pinkie snoozes away. So you have to narrate now for the next... all of it!
What is this chapter so far? Dan slowly lowers Pinkie onto their... Ow!
Properly.
I'm doing your voice. Ow. Dan slowly lowers Pinkie onto their bed and smiles as he brushes an errant curly strand of hair from her face and kisses her forehead. DH walks behind the counter to the bakery carrying a tray of cupcakes, slips, and flings several colorful projectiles into the faces and bodies of Dan and Pinkie as they stand behind the register. Dan and Pinkie merely sigh as Pinkie pulls out an identical-looking tray of cupcakes and walks off towards the dining area with it. Dan crawls up the stairs to the apartment, reaching out for each step and strenuously pulling himself up. Feminine-looking arms and hands are wrapped around his neck, attached to a sleeping Pinkie Pie who snoozes on his back. Dan reaches up to the knob of the apartment from his crawling position and opens the door, slumping half into the apartment as he continues to crawl inside, Pinkie Pie still clinging to his neck and snoring away. Pinkie excitedly bounds up to the apartment stairs as Dan grumpily follows her. A small green alligator wearing a teal party hat stares vacantly at the excited-looking girl wearing a yellow and light blue striped party hat on top of her pink mop of hair. Pinkie joyfully converses with her mute pet through the tiny compact mirror. Dan stares irritably back at the alligator as Pinkie starts changing the pointed cone he is wearing over and over again with a large collection of striped, polka-dotted, and colorful party hats. From behind the alligator, Spike and Rarity point towards Dan and giggle to themselves as Pinkie continues to change the cardboard apparel atop his head. Dan shouts at them, causing them to pause, but Fluttershy walks into view and begins gently chastising Dan, who folds his arms and looks away with a sullen expression. Wally hands Dan a rectangular slip of paper that Dan examines. Dan's eyes widen and a wicked grin emerges across his face. Wally also hands a similar slip to Pinkie. Pinkie smiles proudly to herself as she examines her own little sheet of paper. Chris parks his blue sedan in front of the antique mall as Dan throws open the passenger door and gleefully runs into the store, Chris following. Dan happily hands an elderly-looking gentleman 8 $100 bills and motions emphatically to the mirror. The man smiles back at Dan and waves an arm at the mirror. Dan grins a toothy, devilish smile to himself as he wrings his hands together. Dan pauses as a finger taps his shoulder. He looks up towards Chris, who points to the large mirror, then out to his car with an unhappy expression on his face. Chris holds his hands up and out in the rough dimensions of the mirror and shrinks the motions down as he nods to the car. Dan turns and snarls and starts animatedly waving his hands about as he yells at Chris. Dan faces Chris, Dan walking backwards as Chris and him hold the mirror up and trudge past stores, across streets, past fast food restaurants, over sidewalks, past palm tree after palm tree, past nice house, past okay-looking houses, past run-down-looking houses, and finally make their way to a set of familiar-looking stairs. The two carefully make it to the apartment door as Dan carefully unlocks and opens the door, a hand still firmly gripping the mirror as Chris strains under its considerable weight. The two walk the mirror in and place it carefully on its stand on the apartment floor. Their job complete, Dan wipes sweat from his forehead as Chris woozily collapses on top of him. Dan screams angrily at Chris as he finds the much larger man's bulk near impossible to crawl out from under. Dan died.
Okay. Pinkie and Dan walked up the stairs to their apartment, enjoying the 2 days in a row of them returning to the apartment when the sun was actually still out. "Oh, I'm so excited for Gummy's after party!" Pinkie exclaimed. Dan rolled his eyes.
"Another thrilling evening of talking to a vacant-looking creature. Can't wait."
He responded to the pink raglan, pink denim short, yellow and light blue stocking, hot pink sneaker-wearing, hat-wearing, socks-wearing girl, flatly. "I know, right?" Pinkie responded exuberantly as she unlocked the door to apartment 8 and threw open the door.
"Surprise!"
"Oh yeah, surprise."
Meow.
Pinkie paused and stared blankly as Chris and Elise jumped into sight. She glanced around the apartment and noticed balloons, streamers, and a banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Pinkie," and even Mr. Mumbles in a party hat.
"Happy birthday, you vacant-looking creature, you!"
Dan said, lifting a hand up to ruffle Pinky's hair. Pinky inhaled a huge volume of air. "Oh, it's my birthday!" she exclaimed excitedly. Elise laughed.
Pinky, you have to be the easiest person to ever throw a surprise party for, she declared.
Pinky giggled nervously to herself. "Hey, Pinky," Chris exclaimed excitedly. "We brought you a cake." Pinky and Dan's happy expressions crashed and burned into a blazing fireball of dread. "An ice cream cake," Chris added. Dan breathed a sigh of relief. Pinky put her palms together and held them at a point towards her chin. "Oh, thank you," she murmured, looking up to the sky. The two roommates entered the apartment.
"Oh, what is this balhookie?"
Language. Dan exclaimed, motioning towards a wood-grain coffee table with a shelf underneath the table surface, a large black folding table, and a matching set of folding chairs, all with pink ribbons wrapped around them. Elise rolled her eyes.
"Oh no." They rolled back into her head. "We thought you two could use some real furniture."
"Ah, I think that's very thoughtful," Pinky exclaimed joyfully. "Come here, you two." Elise and Chris happily approached Pinky as she wrapped her arms around them and gave them a tight squeeze.
"Well, the tables and chairs can stay, but there's no way we're replacing the crate,"
Dan insisted as he crossed his arms quickly and threw them out in front of him.
"It's been just like a crate to me."
Pinky broke her hug and walked up to Dan with a smile. "Dan, I'm sure there's room in our lives for both the coffee table and the crate." Dan folded his arms and looked away with a brooding expression.
"Oh, all right."
He walked over to the crate and leaned in close to it.
"Don't worry, buddy," he whispered. "That coffee table has got to sleep sometime."
"Dan," Chris said flatly, "you're talking to a crate," he pointed out. "Crate is very sensitive, Chris," Pinky insisted. Dan motioned out to his roomie.
"See, she gets it. Besides,"
Dan pointed at Elise and Chris,
"you're not supposed to buy people things they need on their birthday. You're supposed to buy them frivolities they don't really need but want anyways," Dan
insisted with an irritated tone. Chris raised an eyebrow. "Kinda like your gift, you mean?" Dan smiled smugly.
"Yep."
Pinky inhaled air as if she was trying to deplete the entire department of oxygen. "Dan, you got me something!" Pinky exclaimed exuberantly. "Show me, show me, show me!" she pleaded, clapping her hands together under her chin. Dan flashed Chris a quick smile, then looked back at Pinky.
"Close your eyes."
Pinky smiled wide with an audible squeak and closed her eyes, giddily shaking with anticipation. Dan grabbed her wrist and gently led her into the bedroom. Chris and Elise followed. Dan led Pinky towards the sliding door of the closet, her weapons neatly stacked against the wall of the side. All right, open them." Pinky did as commanded and stared blankly at the closet door in front of her. Dan chuckled.
"You need to open the door, you Nimrod."
"Oh, right, I knew that," Pinky said, extending a pink nail-polished hand towards a round metal indent that served as a closet handle and pulled the door aside. Pinky clasped a hand to her mouth as she gasped loudly, looking at her own reflection. Dan smiled wide to himself as he watched Pinky slowly move a hand towards a mirror's frame and gently slid her hand up to the silver lining, lightly touching the butterfly at the top. Tears began to form in her eyes. Dan frowned.
"Uh-oh, she's crying. I screwed up. Stupid, stupid! A mirror? What were you thinking? I knew I should have gotten her that flamethrower."
Dan? Pinky choked out.
It's fine, Pinky. Your real present is...
Dan's attempt to find an excuse was foiled as Pinky quickly turned, wrapped her arms around him, and buried her wet eyes in his shirt. Dan responded, not sure what was going on at this point. Pinky looked into Dan's green eyes with teary sky blue eyes and gave him a happy smile. Dan, this is the nicest, most thoughtful, best present anyone has got me ever. Dan breathed a sigh of relief.
Glad you like it.
Like it? Pinky exclaimed, breaking the hug to hold Dan at arm's length. I love it, she announced. Pinky slowly moved her head closer to Dan's and pursed her lips. Yeah, that's spelled right. Dan closed his eyes and did the same. Elise giggled and elbowed her husband lightly in the ribs. Pinky blushed and stopped, remembering Dan and her had an audience. She cleared her throat. Dan opened his eyes.
What?
He looked past Pinky, catching Chris and Elise's reflection.
Oh.
He turned and fixed the two of them with an irritated gaze. Chris held his hands up defensively. It's okay, we can give you two a moment. Right, honey? Chris said, looking down at his wife.
What?
Elise
rolled her eyes back at her head.
Elise sighed disappointedly.
Of course.
She said with a slightly nervous smile. Dan merely grumbled.
It's okay. With our luck, a rabid Wolverine from space would fly into the window and start attacking us with psychic beams.
He mused. Shh, Pinky said, waving her hands in front of her. Don't give him ideas. Dan cocked an eyebrow at her.
Give who ideas?
Pinky waved a dismissive hand. Never mind. She looked towards Chris and Elise. All right, gang, I'd say this party could use a little conga line and a lot of music, she announced. Dan shimmied behind Pinky and placed his hands on her hips.
All right, birthday girl, lead the way to the stereo.
Chris and Elise chuckled as Chris placed his hands on Dan's hips and Elise placed hers on Chris's. Pinky gleefully led the small train of people out of the bedroom. Bye, Chris. Bye, Elise. Pinky said out of the apartment door into the night as she waved. Thanks again for all the great gifts and the ice cream cake.
Bye, Pinky.
Elise called back.
See you soon.
Pinky closed the door and grinned at her roommate who was sitting on the couch, already getting used to the new coffee table by resting his feet.
So,
Dan began.
I'm guessing you want to look at that stupid pet of yours through a much larger mirror.
Pinky's smile widened. He can wait just another minute.
Oh? What did you have? Ah!
Dan exclaimed in alarm as Pinky got a running start towards the couch, jumped over the coffee table, pounced on top of him, and pinned him to the couch and began raining kisses all over his cheeks and forehead. Just say your line.
Pinky, you goofball!
Dan said, chuckling.
You don't need to actually say mwah each time.
Pinky giggled. Oh, I know, Dan. Oh, one more. Dan paused as Pinky positioned her face over his. For a second, he thought she was going to kiss him on the lips. Instead, Pinky leaned down and planted a kiss on his nose. Mwah! Pinky snickered. All right, all done, she announced, rolling off of Dan, off the couch and onto her feet. She bounded over to the side of the couch and leaned down to pick up her pink bag that was propped against the couch. She reached and pulled out her compact mirror, set her bag down on the coffee table shelf, reached over to grab Dan's wrist, helped him up, then walked into the bedroom, Dan in tow. Pinky sat on the edge of the bed, and Dan sat next to her as they opened the compact mirror. She was greeted by the sight of Twilight's library, decorated with balloons, streamers, a large banner that read Happy Birthday, Pinky, a small banner that read Happy Day After Your Birthday, Gummy, her friends happily chatting and milling about, and Gummy wearing a party hat sitting on a snack table. Twilight turned to the mirror, noticing Pinky's happy face.
Happy birthday, Pinky! She said cheerfully.
The other 4 ponies present and Baby Dragon likewise turned and wished Pinky a happy birthday. Pinky beamed at her friends. Thanks, every pony, she grinned excitedly. You'll never believe what Dan got me. Twilight chuckled.
Does it explode or shoot fire?
Pinky giggled. Nope.
You're right, I don't believe it,
Twilight said with a grin. Dan leaned over into the view of the mirror.
That was Plan B, however,
he said with a wry grin. The ponies and Dragon shared a laugh.
Of course it was,
Twilight commented. Lucky! Pinky exclaimed. She quickly turned the compact mirror to face a large full-length mirror sitting in her closet. A chorus of oohs and ahs erupted from the mirror. Dan, it's gorgeous, Rarity exclaimed. Nice going, bro, Spike said. Pretty, Fluttershy murmured. Pretty cool,
Rainbow Dash double remarked.
Nice going, partner, Applejack added. Responded Gummy.
Can you not spit all over me?
Shut up, just say your line.
Beautiful and practical,
Twilight commented.
Just one sec.
There was a flash of purple light from the compact, and then another from the larger mirror. Soon the party was in full view of Dan and Pinky from the large mirror in the open closet. Wow, awesome, Spike commented. Pinky clapped her hands excitedly. This is great! I can see y'all so much better now. She sat down the compact mirror she was holding up and held up her palms. And look, no hands, Pinky said, giggling. Rainbow Dash held up her hooves. Oh, not like having hands is such a big deal, she commented with a smile. Dan rolled his eyes as everyone else joined in laughter. Come on, every pony, Pinky exclaimed. 3 cheers for Dan. Dan grinned wide and held his arms out wide as he basked in the cheers of hip hip hooray.
I am pretty great,
Dan responded. Oh, and modest too, Rarity joked. Twilight chuckled.
See, Dan? See how well everything works when you think of someone else for a change?
Dan paused. He trailed off and his eyes became distant and unfocused. Everyone else went silent and looked at Dan. Dan, sweetie, is something the matter? Rarity asked. Dan snapped his attention to the white unicorn.
No! Nothing! Rarity, I'm fine!
Dan responded, devoid of tone. Everyone else's expressions turned concerned. Pinky stared at Dan, who was managing one heck of a language poker face. Dan's never actually called Rarity by that name before. Did Twilight's comment really upset him that much?
Hey guys, I think I need some air.
Dan commented.
If you'll excuse me.
Everyone followed Dan with their eyes as he hopped off the edge of the bed and walked out of the room. Twilight grimaced as she suddenly felt every eye on the room draw towards her.
Was it something I said?
Well, it could have been a Matt Nasser there. Sorry. Whoa, so that did not mean so much spit.
That was so wet.
Applejack commented.
Just do a sound of spitting. Don't actually just go hop.
It's called method acting.
Ah! I need a towel.
It's your line.
I didn't mean anything. I've never known Dan to be so sensitive.
Twilight insisted.
Here, let me go tell...
Twilight walked forward and banged her head on the glass in front of her.
Ow!
There was some light chuckling from the occupants of the library. Pinky continued to look out the bedroom entrance with concern. Twilight, it's a mirror, not a portal, Spike reminded. Twilight rubbed a forehoof under her horn.
I knew that. It's just much better looking now. Pinky?
Pinky turned back to the mirror. Yes, Twilight?
Could you please go apologize for me? It was a very nice gift and I shouldn't have made fun of him for it.
Twilight admitted. Pinky smiled weakly. Of course, Twilight. I'll bring him right back, Pinky declared. Dan sat motionless as he rested his arms against the apartment walkway railing and stared out into the empty Van Nuys night. The apartment door opened behind him. He didn't look back or shift from his position. Whew! Pinky said. I thought you were going to make me chase you through the neighborhood streets to find you, she commented. Because, that's what I made you do that one time? Pinky explained. Dan, look, Twilight says she's really sorry about what she said to you. Dan sighed.
Why? She's right. Or wrong, I guess.
Pinky walked up to the railing, also rested her arms against it, and looked over at Dan. Well, is she right or wrong? Which one is it? She asked, squeakily.
She's right that I've never thought of anyone else. Well, mostly right anyhow. And she's wrong that I was thinking of someone else this time around.
Dan stated. What? Pinky exclaimed. You can't possibly expect me to believe that you got me that beautiful mirror so I could talk to my friends better for yourself. There's just no way that can be true. Dan turned to Pinky.
But it is true. Even me getting a job at the bakery was just so I could get you that mirror.
What? Pinky exclaimed again. Dan, you got a job and suffered all that time just so you could get me a wonderful gift? Pinky's expression went from perplexed to some new previously undiscovered level of confusion, never seen before by man or pony. I know I haven't been at this world all that long, but how the hey could that be considered thinking about yourself? Dan frowned.
I had ulterior motives,
he admitted. Pinky raised her eyebrows. Such as? Dan thought about this for a moment.
Because I want you to fall in love with me so you can't possibly shoot me down if I admit I love you?
Dan shook his head and sighed.
I did it because
Dan attempted to stress the word I as much as humanly possible.
I wanted to make you so happy with what I did.
What? Pinky exclaimed for a third time. Her eyes began twitching and her face contorted in as many different directions as possible. She held up her hands in frustrated claws as her brain ran overtime, trying to process how anything Dan had said to her would count as a shellfish act. Well, mission accomplished, she exclaimed. I'm happy with you, Dan. I'm overjoyed with you, and if I weren't getting a headache for trying to figure out what's wrong, I'd be the happiest girl on this planet right now. Dan sighed again.
I don't deserve to have you happy with me,
Dan said, trailing off at the end.
I'm a monster. Always have been, always will be.
He turned back towards the empty sky and stared out into space. Pinky wrapped her arms around Dan's shoulders. You're not a monster. I mean, monsters are huge, Pinky motioned out with a hand into the air, emphasizing how huge monsters were, and shoot fire out their mouths. Pinky flicked out her fingers from her face, emphasizing how monsters shoot fire out their mouths. And stuff.
You know what I meant.
Dan responded flatly.
I'm a horrible excuse for a human being, and I've lived my life raining misfortune and misery on everyone around me.
But I know that's not true, Pinky insisted.
Maybe you just don't know me that well,
Dan commented. I've lived with you for several months now, and I'm always with you, Pinky pointed out. I'm pretty sure I know you pretty darn well at this point, Dan. Pinky put her hands on Dan's cheeks and gently turned his face to face her. No one has ever been as nice to me as you have, Pinky insisted.
Or as awful,
Dan added. Hey, Pinky's expression softened. But you made up for it, she insisted, smiling softly with tears in her eyes. You more than made up for it. Anything bad you've done is completely overshadowed by all the good you've done. Pinky's smile widened. Here, I'll prove it. Pinky closed her eyes, pursed her lips, and moved her face closer to Dan. Pinky felt a hand lightly touch her lips and Dan break away from her hold as he turned away.
I can't. I'm sorry.
Dan walked away towards the apartment stairs. He stopped dead in his tracks as a sound shattered the silence and stabbed him directly in the heart. It was a sound he had heard only once before, a particular sound not dissimilar to a balloon quickly deflating, but this time mixed with tortured sobs and wailing. Dan turned to face Pinky as tears streamed down her cheeks and dripped off her chin. She whimpered and sobbed and looked at him with glassy, pleading eyes. Dan shook his head and walked back to Pinky.
I can't just leave her like this. Pinky, I'm sorry, you're right. I'm being an idiot.
Dan said, softly. Pinky responded, wiping tears from her eyes.
Yeah. Look, I'll go back in there and tell Twilight I accept her apology.
Really? Pinky exclaimed, smiling through her tears.
Really?
Dan answered. He closed the distance between the two to a few inches.
No, stop wailing, crybaby,
he said before planting a kiss on her cheek. Pinky's hair exploded out in all directions as she wrapped her arms around Dan and tackled them to the ground. Dan's back cracking at the tight squeeze.
Ow!
Dan exclaimed from his position on the ground. Pinky pushed herself up and looked down at Dan with happy, tear-filled eyes. Oh, thank you, Dan, she grinned. But you can just insult Twilight instead if you want. Dan chuckled and rose to his feet, pulling Pinky up with him.
I don't think that's necessary.
Ooh, you can accept her apology and insult her, Pinky suggested.
You know what?
Dan said.
Okay, yeah, let's go with that.
Yay!
What's taking them so long?
Twilight exclaimed impatiently. Oh, I'm sure everything is fine, Fluttershy assured softly, patting Twilight's back supportively. Twilight's ears shot up into points as she grabbed the yellow Pegasus face in her forehooves and turned it to face her.
No, everything is not fine. If I upset Dan, that means I upset Pinky. And if I upset Pinky, then she won't have a happy birthday party. And if she doesn't have a happy birthday party, it'll be all my fault and I'll never forgive myself,
Twilight declared.
I think it's Spike.
No, it's your line.
Oh. Wow, and I thought Prissy was a drama queen.
The ponies and dragon turned with an excited Dan. Say your line.
Hey, eyesores!
Dan responded, waving at the mirror as Pinky happily walked into view of the mirror. Dan turned and looked at Twilight.
Hey, Sparkler, I accept your apology.
Twilight let go of Fluttershy and breathed a big sigh of relief as she rested her hooves back on the ground and her ears relaxed.
Also, your purple color scheme is repulsive and I hate you,
Dan added. Twilight paused with a confused expression and soon began laughing as everyone else joined her. Alright, every pony, now that that's out of the way, let's get this party started, Pinky declared, dashing out of the room. Soon the apartment was full of the noises of electric guitars, bass guitars, and drums.
Eep,
Fluttershy exclaimed, diving for cover under a chair. Rarity and Applejack smiled and rolled their eyes. Oh, heck yes! Rainbow Dash exclaimed Hey, shut up, I was saying my line. Heck yes! Rainbow Dash exclaimed excitedly. Oh yeah, rock on! Spike declared. Twilight wordlessly began jerking her limbs, wings, and even tongue out at randomly, completely out of sync with the music, with a happy grin on her face. Dan! Pinky said excitedly, running back into the room. Dance with me! Dan smiled as Pinky grabbed his hands and jerked him onto his feet. The two began rhythmically moving their bodies to the loud, speedy music playing from the stereo. Hey, Dan? Pinky asked in the darkness, bare arms wrapped around her pajama-clad body as she stared into Dan's chest.
Yes, Pinky?
Dan responded. You awake?
Have you entered some sort of dumbest question ever competition I'm unaware of?
Dan responded. Pinky giggled. No, but are you still thinking about what Twilight said? Pinky asked, looking up toward Dan's face. Dan looked down at her.
No, well, sorta, I guess.
He admitted. Dan. Pinky began softly as she lifted a slim hand to place on Dan's cheek. I just wanted to let you know it doesn't matter to me what you've done or who you used to be. All I care about is that you're here with me and you make me happy. Happier than I've ever been. Happier than I thought possible. Pinky smiled. So, feel better, please. Dan smiled softly at the pink-haired girl in his arms.
Alright, Pinky. That does make me feel better.
Dan tightened his grip on Pinky, drawing her into his chest. Pinky returned the hug. Good, that makes me...
Happy?
Dan suggested with a chuckle. Pinky giggled. Yeah, I feel so happy and warm and nice. Dan lightly patted the mop of pink hair attached to the woman resting against him as he stared into the darkness of the bedroom.
What I've done, eh? Well, maybe we should just find out how true that is.
Author of note.
And life leads me here.
Now threesome comments.
I don't want to. Skip that part. Skip to the end.